G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope that you are super well. Grab yourself a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, a whiskey, a beer, or whatever drink is your favorite. And I'm grabbing myself a little piece of chocolate brownie, homemade. Today I want to talk about a recent rumour that first appeared on Nikon Rumours. So credit to Nikon Rumours. Now, this rumour came out in the days after the A9 III launch. Nikon Rumours states that they had been sitting on this information for a while prior to the launch of the A9 III, but just didn't have enough information at this stage to warrant putting it out. But with the arrival of the A9 III, they state it was time to put out this information. Now, what are we talking about here? Well, this is the idea that the Olympics, the 2024 Olympics, are coming next year. And of course, in the past, camera companies, Canon, Nikon, they have tried to put out their flagship cameras during the Olympics year. And whether that was the D1, the D2, the D3, the D4, the D5, the D6, and it was going to be the Z9, the Olympics were delayed, and so was the Z9 and the A1 and the R3. So will the camera companies be trying to return to that cycle of getting their high-end, high-speed cameras out for the Olympics, for those that want to capture the very, very best in sporting photography? And this is where this rumour, I think, is really interesting. And in these types of videos, I actually try and wear three different hats, and that is from the consumer's perspective. Does the consumer want this product? The manufacturer's perspective, will they and can they bring this sort of product to market? And then maybe sort of the general space. What's going on in the industry? Are there competitors doing something similar? Is there any patterns that we've seen in the past? These are the angles that I will be assessing whether I think there's a chance that a Z9H will be coming. Let's talk about it. Well, the very first part of this conversation is that Nikon has used the H moniker before. I think the most recent version of it is the D2H. I actually owned the D2X, so I know a fair bit about what that camera was and what was going on at the time in Nikon world. Let's first talk about it from the manufacturer's perspective. A Z9H. Let's speculate on what that might be technologically speaking. Well, if we look at how Nikon has done these types of cameras in the past, for example, let's talk about the D3X or the D3S. And ultimately what these cameras end up being is they pretty much use the same chassis. So here we have the Z9 chassis, and everything about it remains pretty much the same. And thus, what this allows for is a manufacturer to bring a new product, like it's a brand new product, to market without having to change very much hardware at all. In the past, the H cameras were high speed. That is what the H stood for, but they were usually lower megapixels, and that's where the speed came from. And again, this actually makes a great deal of sense. Of course, the Z9, along with its sibling, the Z8, is an absolute consummate all-rounder, giving us speed, picture quality, and high megapixels, with 45 megapixels being a lot from my perspective. If you want crazy speed, what do? Well, you can halve the size of your data pipeline and then double the speed. And that's without changing anything at all with a current existing Z9. By the time the Olympics come, which is around about 6 months from now, we will be looking at it being 2.5 years from the launch of the Z9. Other aspects of the camera could be tweaked. So halving 45.7 almost becomes 23 megapixels, and of course we know it's not going to be 23 megapixels, it would be 24. Probably the most common pixel size in 35mm to date. Half the data is pushed through when you make a 24 megapixel camera. Right now, 24 megapixels in a Z9, and you double everything that's going on without changing a single other aspect, just from a data pipeline perspective. You could even use the same sort of stacked technology that's in this sensor that's running at 45 megapixels, but of course, because there's half as many pixels to scan, you could also theoretically double the speed of that sensor. Now, from my perspective, this would be very easy. All you have to do is create that new sensor and everything else about this camera can remain the same. The battery, the in-body image stabilization unit, all of the data pipelines, everything. And we know all of this is tooled, and we know Nikon know how to make the Z9. All of them are coming out of the factory, and they'd be well on top of being able to manufacture Z9 chassis and everything that goes with them. So it would be very easy for Nikon to bring that to market. It's only really the sensor. Now, they could choose to tweak other things. They could choose to tweak the processor. They could choose to tweak the data pipeline. And of course, they could choose to tweak CF Express Type B, which 3 or 4 months ago, we had a 4.0 update to CF Express Type B, A, and the non-existent C, doubling the bandwidth of that format. You go from a maximum theoretical of 2 gigabytes per second, which is what this camera does now, and yes, I mean, you never get 100% of that, but it gets close, to 4 gigabytes per second. Everything exists to make a Z9H possible and faster. And of course, we know by looking at companies like Apple and Intel that technology processors just keep getting faster. The next year on, you get that faster processor in your device and it doesn't cost any extra. And what I mean by that is you go from an iPhone 14 to an iPhone 15, it is faster than the previous one, but the price usually remains the same. Same can happen here. In other words, they can upgrade the processor, they can upgrade the data pipeline, and we might get more. It's theoretically possible. You might be able to get more data through without it costing any more. Well, I think from a manufacturer's perspective, if they want to get back into that Olympics cycle, 2024, 2028, the Z9 is super well placed to become a Z9H or whatever else it might be called. And then it comes down to me, and the most interesting part is the sensor. Now, again, I think many would agree that the Z8 and the Z9 have been tremendously successful cameras. The sensor is very fast. They are the only cameras on the market that do not have a mechanical shutter at all because that sensor is so fast. And so to double the speed of that sensor, just to double it, would obviously make it significantly faster. And so all of those advancements to me are very simple, not difficult, not expensive advancements to bring us a Z9H. And I suppose the only question to me from a manufacturer's perspective is, what is the appetite for global? Clearly, Sony have arrived with the A9 III. It's an enormous achievement, kudos, where it's due. Well done. And yes, I have talked about the fact that everybody's been working on it for a while. It's true. But Sony are first to market. Congratulations, Sony. Would Nikon be doing it in a Z9H? Well, the rumour states it might be, maybe, global, question mark, but it would also have a high-res mode. What does that mean? Well, maybe it could have pixel shift because the ZF has pixel shift. Maybe it has some sort of fancy pixel shift, which is more like an Olympus, where you can do it handheld and it actually takes into account moving objects, like the Sony A7R V. Now, if we got a camera like that, that would be amazing. Back to the sensor, would it be global? Well, in real terms, in absolutely real terms, we have to consider what the pros and cons of global, but not only the pros and cons of global, but the pros and cons of just getting sensors that go faster and faster to the point that they become global. And this is for every brand. These statements are not aimed at any particular brand. There's certainly conversation around the faster and faster a sensor gets, it can impact dynamic range and higher ISO noise. And this is a worthy and relevant conversation to have. And I think what Nikon tried to do in balancing the Z9, Z8 sensor was giving us a little bit of both. Extraordinary speed and also dynamic range and noise levels that were very similar to what we've had in, say, a D850, a Z7 and a Z7 II. I think that's where it's landed, and I've done some testing, and I am very happy to use the Z8 and the Z9 across a very wide range of settings without thinking that dynamic range and higher ISO is being impacted. Of course, everybody has different opinions, but even more importantly than opinions is everybody has different use cases. How we use our cameras very much determines where the pain points are and where the happy points are. Some people just live at higher ISOs. They might be at 6400, 10,000, 16,000 and above. And thus they're acutely aware of high ISO performance. Whereas my use case is I spend most of my shooting life between base ISO, which is probably something like 80%, 90% of my usage is actually base ISO. And then high ISO for me is something like 3200, 6400, and I really don't use above for stills. I just don't need to. I don't need to with the glass that I have and what I shoot. And that is how opinions are formed. Because that's my range of shooting, there just isn't pain points for me. I don't feel those pain points. But the faster the sensor, the more this becomes a potential pain point. At least that's what we're told. And thus you could have a Z9H, which is 24 megapixels and faster. And whether it's global or whether it's just faster than what we've already got, I think both possibilities have their pros and cons. And of course, not all sensors are made the same. So you just don't know how one company will tweak a type of sensor versus another company. So whether the Z9H is global or just really fast, I don't know. I'm not sure it matters too much. I think based on what I know with my 25 years of working with Nikon cameras and almost 25 years working with Nikon digital cameras, their DNA is to bring products to market that the Nikon cameras will deliver images that are certainly on par with what the market expects they should be. And if I cast my memory back, I can't really think of a camera that's come out of Nikon that's ever been a significant backward step. So I think unless Nikon has global technology where it can be in keeping with cameras we've seen before from Nikon, they won't go to that place. That's my best guess. They just want to maintain the quality of the image that we've all come to expect. So that's the manufacturer's perspective. I see it being quite feasible and quite possible and not that big an effort to get out, say, 10,000, 30,000 Z9Hs because 95% of what is required, it already is being manufactured. And it's just about that sensor, which of course there's going to be people at Nikon, all they do is work on sensors all day long of all different types. I don't think it's a big ask, let alone the fact that they file so many patents, and in order for all of that research and development to go on, there is people that just literally do sensors. Okay, what about from the consumer's perspective? Is a Z9H of interest? It's a really interesting question. And like all of these high-speed cameras, and for example, I think the latest one that we would consider from the Nikon range that fits this category is the D6. And the D6, well, what is that? A 20 megapixel high-speed camera. And when did it come out? 2020. And when is 4 years later? 2024. Okay. So those people that have gone through all the Ds, D4, D5, D6, maybe they're ready for their next camera. Great. They probably own a Z9, but maybe a Z9H would be a useful part of their kit as well. And this sort of camera is very much focused at sports, maybe wildlife. And that's kind of it. And if you look at Nikon's range, we have cameras to cover everything else. Absolutely everything else is now covered with the Z range. This is not a camera for a big market. Yes, anybody can use it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying people can't use it. You could use it for weddings. You could use it for architecture. You could use it for anything. But I really doubt that you're going to buy a $5,000 or $6,000 US high-speed 24 megapixel camera, and let's say it shoots at 60 frames per second raw, who knows, and then you're going to use it for architecture. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that's a great idea. I think you can buy a Z7 II for that, or even a Z8. Z9H is a niche product, no question, just based on the price and based on the ecosystem that already exists. I think there's a market, and yes, I think there's enough sports and wildlife photographers to make a small tweak to the Z9 to bring us a Z9H. It actually makes a lot of sense to me, and we've seen Nikon do this a lot with their flagship cameras that they've iterated. Okay, so what about the market as a whole? That's the final part of the Z9H story. What's going on in the market? Well, we do have, and this is really interesting to me when you think, do we need a full-bodied sort of flagship style 24 megapixel action camera? Do we need it? And lo and behold, Canon have already done it. They got their R3 out before they got their R1 out. 100%, this camera already exists in the market, the R3. And of course, now Sony have given us the A9 III. And here we have Canon and Sony, both with their high-end sports, maybe somewhat wildlife cameras. So already we have Canon with the R3, they've been at it for a couple of years, and now Sony with the A9 III. Obviously there was the A9 II, which was also 24 megapixels, but they're both 24 megapixels. So there is absolutely, in the market, this segment of action cameras that sit around the 24 megapixel mark. They're highly professional and they're super fast moving. And that is the R3. That is unquestionably the A9 III. And to me, there's just no question when Nikon have already done most of the work in a Z9 that a Z9H could exist. Now we've worn the three hats of the manufacturer, the consumer, and the market as a whole. That's the three different hats. I do think Nikon is on a little bit of a roll right now. This year's been a great year in the Z8, the ZF, the 85mm 1.2, the 180-600, the Planner, and a whole host of other releases, as well as some great firmware updates that we've seen. And if Nikon wanted to maintain that sort of momentum and energy, I really feel like a Z9H would help do that. It really would, because it would say, we're right here, right now, with our peers, and, well, we can do the same sort of stuff. I think personally, if I was doing product ranging, knowing that it's not a big step to turn a Z9 into a Z9H, and it would just be a really good look. And is the tech there? Now, what is that tech? I'm just going to repeat what I've already said. It doesn't have to be global. It could just simply be faster than this, and it could be significantly faster because it's been, at the time of launching, it'll be something like 2.5 years. So I have got no problem with the technology having advanced, and that's no big deal for any company, including Nikon, that they could be giving us a faster 24 megapixel sensor. Global or not, it might be either. And for all the people that have tested the Z8 and the Z9, I'm still yet to hear many people complaining about this mechanical shuttler sensor not being fast enough. But some people will always want faster. And ultimately, the question is, will it happen? I do not have a crystal ball. I have no idea. I think it's possible from a manufacturer's perspective. I think it's possible from a consumer's perspective. I do think there's a big enough market there, considering how little R&D is required and how many units would be required to be shipped to make it profitable. And I certainly think the market and the timing is spot on. Olympics 2024. So the moons are aligning. It makes a lot of sense to me, but of course it may not happen. And in 2024, we are certainly hoping, we're absolutely, everyone cross their fingers, We're certainly hoping for some other cameras to appear, like say a Z50 Mark II, like say the Z6 III, like say if the Z50 Mark II is not a higher speed APS-C, maybe some sort of higher speed APS-C, Z90, Z70. Those cameras are also highly coveted by different areas of this market. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm going to put up a poll. What camera would you like to buy in 2024? And I'm not trying to get people to buy cameras, I'm not pushing that, but if you are planning on buying one, is it a Z9H? Is it a Z50 II? Is it a Z6 III? Is it a Z7090? Is it any of those or other? And please do write in the comments below as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts around the Z9H. Is it a possibility or is it a pipe dream? All right, time for me to get back to my cake. It's been absolutely spectacular to see you. And if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. Bye for now.